Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to take the sources you give us, unpack them, and really get to the core insights. The goal is helping you get genuinely informed quickly, finding those aha moments without getting totally swamped.
Exactly. And today, we've got a really interesting mission. We're looking at Dr. Eugene P. Odum, a huge figure in ecology, and his likely perspectives on agroecology and, well, agroecologism based on the papers you sent over.
Okay, so let's set the scene a bit. Agroecology. It's basically applying ecological ideas to how we grow food, right?
Yeah.
Designing and managing farms and food systems.
Yeah, it's often seen as like three things rolled into one: the science, the actual farming practices, and also a social movement, pushing for food systems that are good for the planet, fair to people, and economically sound.
And then there's agroecologism. That sounds a bit broader.
It is. It's more philosophical, maybe political. It's really calling for a big shift, a transformation away from industrial farming. Wants to ground everything in ecology and, importantly, food sovereignty.
Got it. Now, Eugene Odum, 1913 to 2002, he said a giant.
Oh, absolutely. Often called the father of modern ecology. His work was foundational for understanding ecosystems, how they're interconnected, how energy moves through them, how nutrients cycle around.
And he was very science-focused, quantitative.
Very much so.
Yeah.
He believed in measuring things, in understanding the dynamics through data, through numbers. Systems thinking was key for him.
Okay. So agroecology obviously uses ecological ideas, which sounds like something Odum would appreciate on some level.
All right, there's an alignment there for sure.
But our deep dive today is about potential friction points, critiques from his perspective.
Exactly. We're going to try and look at these modern approaches through his very rigorous scientific lens. What questions might he have raised?
Okay, so let's put on those Odum spectacles. First big thing. His work was so focused on natural ecosystems. How would he view applying those ideas to systems that are, well, designed and managed by humans, like farms?
Yeah, that's a really good starting point. I mean, he'd likely see the value in using ecological principles, definitely. But a potential concern, from his viewpoint, might be this shift in focus.
Shift in focus? How so?
Well, his whole career was built on studying natural self-organizing systems. He saw those as the place to discover fundamental ecological laws.
Yeah.
Like, you study the undisturbed system to really learn how things work.
So nature is the textbook, basically.
Precisely. So the Odumian concern might be, are we spending enough time understanding the deep principles from those natural systems before we jump into managing the human-designed ones?
Okay.
He really believed you needed that foundational knowledge from less disturbed places to effectively and wisely manage the ones we influence.
Makes sense. You learn the rules before you try to rewrite them. Okay, what about the other layer? Agroecologism explicitly brings in social justice, politics, culture.
Yeah, alongside the ecology.
How does that fit with Odum's very science-driven approach?
Oh, that touches on something crucial. The line between scientific rigor and, let's say, broader social aims. Odum fought hard to establish ecology as a solid objective science.
Right.
So a potential flag for him might be ensuring these really important socio-political goals don't inadvertently water down the scientific objectivity, the empirical strength of the ecology being applied.
Keeping the science purely scientific, even when it's applied.
That's the gist. The Odumian view would likely be that the science should inform the practice, inform the movement, but it shouldn't be driven by preset outcomes or advocacy goals. The scientific process needs its integrity.
Okay, I see the potential tension there. Now, you mentioned Odum and numbers. Quantitative analysis. That feels like a big one.
Huge. Absolutely central to his work. He was all about measuring things. Energy budgets, nutrient flows, productivity rates. These weren't just like interesting side notes for him.
They were the main event.
They were the key indicators. They told you about the system structure, how it functioned, its health. So while agroecology definitely talks about nutrient cycling, biodiversity,
He'd want the numbers.
he'd demand the numbers. An Odumian critique would hammer on the need for robust, quantitative assessment. It wouldn't be enough to say, we close the nutrient loop.
He'd ask.
He'd ask, by how much? Quantify it. Show me the data. What's the actual net energy balance of this farm now? How does biodiversity quantitatively affect stability? Can you measure that?
And boundaries too, right? Defining the system.
Critically important. He'd insist on clearly defining your agroecosystem. Is it the farm, the whole watershed, a regional food shed? And then meticulously tracking everything that crosses that boundary, inputs, outputs, That rigorous accounting was his signature.
Wow. So like asking for the energy cost of trucking in compost versus making it on site?
Yeah.
That level of detail.
Exactly that level. What's
Wow.
the real energy cost, the real nutrient flow? He'd want the full balance sheet, rigorously measured.
Okay. So, complexity. Natural systems are messy, interconnected. Agroecological systems try to embrace some of that, but they're still managed. How would Odum view that complexity?
Well, coming from studying incredibly complex natural systems, he'd likely approach agroecosystem complexity with maybe a bit of caution, concern about potential oversimplification.
Oversimplification, even if they're trying to be diverse.
Yeah, because natural systems have these nonlinear responses, right? Small changes causing big unexpected effects, feedback loops, emergent properties, things that aren't always obvious just by looking.
Right. Things you can't easily predict.
Exactly. So he'd probably argue for using sophisticated ecological methods, maybe modeling, to really get a handle on that complexity. He'd be wary of claims about, say, stability or sustainability unless they were backed by solid, long-term quantitative data that accounted for these tricky interactions.
So just having more types of plants isn't enough.
Not in itself, from his perspective. You'd need to understand how those interactions quantitatively contribute to the whole system's function and resilience over time. It's a deeper, data-driven understanding he'd push for.
Which ties back to the science integrity point, especially with agroecologism being partly a social movement.
It does. There's that potential tension again. Odum championed ecology as a rigorous science. While he'd see the need for sustainable agriculture, he'd likely stress that the scientific investigation needs to stay independent.
Independent from the advocacy.
Yeah. The science needs to provide credible data, robust analysis, regardless of whether it perfectly aligns with the movement's current narrative or goals.
The science informs, it doesn't just confirm.
Beautifully put. Its credibility relies on that independence.
Okay, let's get specific. Energy flow analysis. You said that was core Odum. How would he apply that lens?
Ah, yes. This is probably where his critique would be sharpest. Energy flow was everything to him. Remember his famous line about industrial agriculture, potatoes made of oil?
Yeah, highlighting the fossil fuel inputs.
Exactly. So he would absolutely scrutinize agroecology on this front. Does it really account for all of the energy subsidies? Not just fuel for tractors.
Everything else.
Everything. The energy embedded in making and transporting organic fertilizers, the energy for irrigation, even the human labor component factored in energetically.
So if you swap synthetic fertilizer for manure,
He'd demand the full energy budget. How much energy did it take to produce, collect, transport that manure? What's the energy return on the crop yield compared to the energy you put in?
is the net energy yield actually better than industrial methods once you account for everything?
That's the killer question he'd ask. Because without that full, rigorous accounting, his argument would be, maybe you're just swapping one kind of energy subsidy for another. Maybe it's not fundamentally more energy efficient or sustainable in the way we assume.
It's a really tough but important question. Okay, what about systems modeling? Using math to predict ecosystem behavior.
Another key Odum emphasis, systems ecology, using models. He'd likely observe that agroecology often focuses on specific practices, good practices, like intercropping or rotations.
But maybe not always integrating them into a bigger picture model.
Right, not always translating them into these comprehensive, quantitative frameworks that let you predict how the whole system behaves over time under different conditions.
Like his work on coral reefs or marshes, looking for balance.
Exactly. He showed how mature, stable ecosystems balance production and respiration. He might worry that many agroecosystems are kept in an early pioneer stage, high production, maybe, but lower stability, needing constant management.
So they don't get to that mature, self-regulating state.
Potentially, yeah. He'd push for models that could simulate long-term effects, like what happens to nutrient cycling in a specific polyculture over 20 years. Can this farm achieve homeostasis, internal balance, without constant external inputs?
Without those models.
He might argue our understanding is incomplete, empirically lacking in predictive power about long-term sustainability.
Right. And he had this idea that human systems should try to mimic mature natural ecosystems, didn't he? Their efficiency, their resilience.
He did. And looking through that lens, he might see some potential shortcomings in certain agroecological approaches.
Such as?
Well, one could be energy quality. Natural systems run primarily on high-quality sunlight. If an agroecological practice becomes very labor-intensive, you might be substituting lower-quality human energy for, say, fossil fuels, without actually improving the overall systemic energy efficiency.
Interesting. It's not just about which energy, but the efficiency of its use.
And scalability is another related point. Industrial ag's fossil fuel dependence is a huge problem, globally destabilizing. But if agroecology focuses too heavily on small-scale solutions, does it adequately address the energy and resource needs of billions of people? Can these highly localized models scale up effectively? That's a question he might pose.
So efficiency and scalability are key metrics from his view. Now, thinking about the social side again, agroecologism's focus on justice, food sovereignty. How might Odum's systems thinking engage with that?
He'd likely acknowledge their importance, but his critique might come from applying those same ecosystem principles, energy flow, feedback loops, hierarchies, to human social and economic systems.
Seeing them as interconnected ecosystems, too.
Exactly. His work with his brother Howard touched on this. He might suggest that some agroecological ideals, while noble, perhaps overlook the powerful systemic forces already in play. Things like global market pressures, agricultural subsidies, urban demand for cheap food.
Yeah.
These are huge factors.
Factors that a single farm or community can't easily change alone.
Precisely. His concern might be that without grappling with these larger economic and policy systems, aiming for food sovereignty just through localized farming practices might be, well, idealistic or impractical on a larger scale. You need to integrate across those scales.
It really emphasizes how interconnected everything is. Okay, one last core Odum concept. The climax ecosystem, that stable, self-maintaining state. How does that contrast with agroecology?
It's a fundamental contrast, really. A climax ecosystem, in theory, reaches a steady state. Closed nutrient cycles, minimal external inputs needed. Agroecosystems, however, are managed landscapes. They require human intervention, tilling, planting, harvesting to produce food.
They're kept productive, not necessarily allowed to reach that climax state.
Right. Odum's potential concern here is that this constant management prevents these systems from developing the inherent resilience and low-energy maintenance of a truly mature ecosystem. He might argue that real sustainability means mimicking those self-regulating features much more closely.
A standard that maybe few current agroecological practices actually meet yet.
That could be his assessment, yes. It sets a very high bar based on natural system principles.
Okay, so it sounds of a tough critique, but probably a constructive one. If Odum were advising the agroecology movement today, what would his key recommendations be based on all this?
Yeah, I think it would be constructive. He'd likely push for, first, much more rigorous ecosystem-level analysis. Bring in the energy flow diagrams, the nutrient models, quantify those ecosystem services properly.
More hard science at the system level.
Definitely. Second, integrate across scales. Connect the local practices to the global flows of energy and resources. Build resilience that works from the farm right up to the global food system.
Think bigger, connect the dots.
Third, education. Really promote systems thinking so people understand agroecology isn't just a set of techniques, but a science grounded in how ecosystems actually work.
Build that deeper ecological literacy.
And finally, don't shy away from technology, but use it smartly. Leverage things like precision agriculture, renewable energy, better ecological modeling if they genuinely enhance efficiency and sustainability according to ecological principles.
So strengthen the science, broaden the perspective, educate and integrate tech wisely.
That feels like a good summary of an Odumian prescription, yeah?
This has been fascinating, really drilling down into how a foundational ecologist might look at modern sustainable agriculture. It seems clear Odum would, appreciate the goals of agroecology and agroecologism.
Intentions, yes.
But his critique would really center on the need for that uncompromising scientific rigor, especially around energy and systems modeling. It has to be grounded in the ecological math, so to speak.
Absolutely. And it really leaves you, the listener, with some big things to chew on. Given Odum's intense focus on net energy, on systemic efficiency, what are the truly critical metrics we should be using to judge if our food systems are genuinely sustainable? Not just locally, but long-term, globally.
And how do we move beyond isolated success stories in agroecology to achieve that kind of deep, lasting global impact?
Those are the crucial questions, aren't they? It pushes us back towards really understanding systems ecology and making sure we apply its principles rigorously to how we feed ourselves. Something to keep thinking about.